Cormac McCarthy was a massive fan of Søren Kierkegaard, and today we are going to track how Kierkegaard's philosophy directly influenced McCarthy's creation of Judge Holden. And we are going to be looking at quotes from the Cormac McCarthy archive that detail this. And I have been to the McCarthy archive before, and what's interesting about the Blood Meridian drafts is that in the marginalia, there are notes all throughout the drafts. But when you get to the Fort Griffin sections, which is where a lot of the ambiguity and the theories of Blood Meridian come from, because we're like, what happens at the end? What happens to the kid? What happens with the judge? The marginalia goes radio silent, and there are only a couple little things across multiple drafts, probably around 3 to 4, that McCarthy writes in those sections. And this contrasts other random scenes in the book that are inconsequential. There are times when McCarthy is filling up the entire page and writing on separate pieces of paper, trying to work out a sunset scene, or a sentence about a sunset. But there is a ton to go over in today's presentation. But if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. In the playlist down below, you will find over 185 videos on Cormac McCarthy, which is the deepest dive on any author in YouTube history. And that playlist is growing every single week. And so I would love to go on this journey with you guys and teach you about Cormac's books, his life, and his philosophy. But enough for me. Let us now start to track Kierkegaard's influence on McCarthy. And people all the time say how I mispronounce words, but I guarantee you that most of the people out there say Kierkegaard. But actually his name is, and it's so funny because I hear people all the time mispronounce it. It's actually in Danish, Kierkagaard. But what matters is not the name and the pronunciation, but the message. And I'm getting a lot of my information today from Michael Lynn Cruz and his work on Kierkegaard's influence on McCarthy. But I have also been to the archive and have my own theories on what all this means. And the first reference to Kierkegaard in the Fort Griffin section reads, "This night thy soul shall be required of thee." And then McCarthy writes Bible, quoted by SK, which is Kierkegaard. And McCarthy was very deep in the study. I mean, I guess maybe he wasn't, but McCarthy most likely got the information that we're going to be talking about today from a biography on Kierkegaard, where the author includes some lost documents, at least lost at that time, where Kierkegaard talks about his experiences with a man named Bishop Meinster. And let me tell you guys really fast that I'm not an expert on Kierkegaard. I have read Fear and Trembling, The Sickness Unto Death, and Diary of a Seducer. And I would highly recommend you read Diary of the Seducer and then check out this book called Seduction by Jean Baudrillard. We talk about Baudrillard on this channel, and Baudrillard is a French sociologist, most famous for his work Simulacra and Simulation, which influenced the Matrix movies. But this book is actually him building on Kierkegaard's philosophy of seduction, and it's this crazy postmodernist take on love, feminism, psychoanalysis, and like everything revolving around desire and attraction. Really good stuff. I've read it multiple times, and it may have blown my mind more than any other postmodernist text, which is saying a lot. But this Bishop Meinster was the Kierkegaard's bishop of their congregation. And Kierkegaard's father, Michael, was an intellectual. Kierkegaard came from an affluent family, and his father, Michael, was an intellectual that hosted people and really created an environment for Søren to really blossom as an intellectual and a philosopher. But obviously, when you look at a young, talented kid who is living in kind of a culture that makes it feel, one could say, that you have to be a Christian, that you have to kind of follow through on these ideologies, that if you want to participate in philosophy or theology, that you have to be involved. This Bishop Meinster kind of became an object of resentment, of mixed feelings, but also of obviously knowledge and revelation for the family, because Søren's brother, Peter, actually worked under Bishop Meinster in New Zealand when they were both serving over there, and actually kind of got into trouble with him over some stuff. So it seems like kind of Søren, who in 1843 wrote Fear and Trembling and kind of his big extended meditations on Christianity that necessarily didn't align with the consensual reality at that time. And we once again hear from Cormac McCarthy in the marginalia of the Fort Griffin scene when he says, Kierkegaard imagines a young officer, there is a battle. And so McCarthy is referring to this parable, these three parables that Kierkegaard writes in his notes, in his journals, about his relationship with this Bishop Meinster guy. And imagine, like, when you sit down and journal, let's just be honest here. I sit down and journal, I just talk shit directly. But Kierkegaard writes three parables about his relationship with this dude, which I thought was kind of funny. Maybe I'll do that sometime. And Kierkegaard is mad because he admires the bishop's piety. He admires how good of a man he is, but he hates his complacency. He hates how he's kind of an order follower, or just kind of not really trying to shake the grounds of Danish Christianity when he has the opportunity to do so. And so this mirrors the relationship with the judge and the kid. And this is why I think McCarthy was thinking of this, because there isn't a direct connection, but there is kind of an archetypal or kind of loose connection, and obviously that McCarthy also saw, between these two sets of relationships. And even crazier, these scenes actually, maybe more so than the relationship aspect, helped build the Fort Griffin scene. Because the first parable is where a captain is out on a luxurious ship carrying some passengers across the sea. And he looks out in the distance and he sees this big storm, and no one else knows about it. And he knows that it's going to be a rough night, that he's going to have to kind of keep things afloat. And so he has some time, and so he goes to the Bible and opens it up and looks for a certain passage. And it's the passage that McCarthy quotes. And we're about to see it quoted by Kierkegaard here. But as he's reading the Bible and preparing, the people down below the cabin, below the captain's deck or whatever, are partying and being drunk. And let's hear from Kierkegaard now. Quote, "But in the cabin, the merriment goes on. Song is heard there, and music and noise. The clatter of dishes and flagon, champagne sparkles, and the captain's health is drunk, etc., etc. It will be a dreadful night, and perhaps this night thy soul shall be required of thee." And so this is kind of a positive analogy of the bishop, because he is the one, everyone else, society, religion is kind of catapulting itself toward catastrophe. And he's the one, he's kind of the last stand. He's the one that's by himself kind of guiding us. So, we get the quote, but that necessarily doesn't too much inform on the relationship between Judge Holden and stuff. But what's funny is McCarthy steals from this. And once again, if you're not stealing as an author, if you're not imitating as an author, then you most likely suck. No offense, because everybody does it. I've been to multiple archives before, and I haven't seen one author who doesn't do it. And McCarthy mirrors a lot of these elements of the party, but then he has the judge tell the kid, quote, "Drink up, this night thy soul may be required of thee." So boom, there we go. We have our first connection. But Kierkegaard does not stop there. He gives us a second parable. And Kierkegaard is playing with the reader. He was like, if you like that, then I'm going to show you something more dreadful. And in the second parable, the captain is now partying with the passengers downstairs, and he's drunk. And one of the passengers comes up to him. He's like, "Oh my God, there's a crazy storm out on the horizon. We're just about to run into it." And that is representing Kierkegaard, who's saying we're about to have this spiritual crisis. We're going to have all these problems. And he was right. If you look at what happened with Germany and all the other stuff, I mean, he was 100% correct. But in the parable, the captain is the crowd favorite. Everybody loves him. And what happens at the end of Blood Meridian, the judge is, quote, a great favorite. He is dancing with everybody. And so once again, very similar scenes. It's so fun to see how all this kind of comes together. And the third parable is on a battlefield. And this is where McCarthy gets the line he said, wrote down, where he said, "Imagine a young officer." And in this parable, there is a battle going on between two different generals. And there's a young general on one side, and he's got his cannons and his artillery in the perfect position, and catches this other army off guard. And as they are riding across, he has this perfect shot to obliterate them all and win the battle, win the war. But the general that's riding across is his old mentor, is this old friend of his that helped bring him up in the army. And this is obviously Kierkegaard's the young general, the bishop's the older general. And what does he do? He doesn't fire. And this is one of the biggest actually parts of Blood Meridian. This is actually one of the keys of the ending of Blood Meridian. And speaking of the end of Blood Meridian and the scene, over on the Right Conscious Substack, I recently released a podcast where I break down the leading alternative theory about what happens at the end of Blood Meridian, because the main theory is that the kid is either killed or raped or consumed by the judge. And there's variations on that theory, but they're all basically the same. Anytime you see someone give a theory, 99% of the time it's something related to that. But scholars and people online have been kind of formulating an alternative theory for years. And if you join the Right Conscious Substack, we are also starting 6 new book clubs in the next 2 weeks on Cormac McCarthy. We are doing a Blood Meridian for Writers book club where we are going to be studying McCarthy's writing style in Blood Meridian and doing assignments together and sharing our work. And I'm going to be releasing some videos kind of explaining what I see McCarthy doing in a lot of the famous scenes of Blood Meridian. But we are also doing Child of God, Stella Maris, No Country for Old Men, The Road, and The Sunset Limited. And if you see, all of the book clubs are at different times, on different days. And plus, if you can't make it to any of those, we are also doing 16 more books in the Right Conscious Book Club, which makes us the most active book club in the world. You will also get access to the Cormac McCarthy Course, which includes over 25 hours of content right now with interviews with scholars, videos on Blood Meridian. You guys can go check all this out in the link down in the description below. I would love to personally get to know all of you guys in my office hours. But going back to the kid missing the judge, and in the alternative theory, this is a big part, but even in the normal theory, because the kid is kind of seen as a failed messianic figure throughout the novel. There are biblical and Gnostic allusions to him being kind of a false starter in terms of a Messiah. He comes down at the start of the novel through the stars, through the meteor shower. And we see scenes like the burning bush and others where he's given an opportunity for redemption. But he, as you see in the tarot scene and when he finds the Four of Cups, has been given the Four of Cups, which is a card, of blended pleasure. And so he's living between the realities of trying to attain gnosis in this reality and then engaging in violence with the Glanton gang. And he never actually sets out on a path. He never really makes a decision. For instance, like someone like Black Jackson or something, or the judge, or Glanton. And so when the kid is in jail later on, if you remember, the judge admonishes him. He said, "You could have killed me. Like, you never make up your mind. And that's why everyone has died, back at the Yuma Ferry Crossing. This is all your fault." And it's very interesting. But the judge tells the kid, "You alone were mutinous. You alone reserved in your soul some corner of clemency for the heathen," which is, the judge is toying with him and inviting him to total evil or to kill him or to liberate himself. And if you read the novel in a classic sense, when the kid becomes a man and moves out into the world, he is at some level, because he's carrying a Bible around in these things, trying to go on, even though he's illiterate, trying to go on this like idealistic quest to change things, kind of like Kierkegaard, but he is obviously doomed to fail. And in The Sickness Unto Death, Kierkegaard writes that, quote, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. No other loss can occur so quietly. Any other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, etc., is sure to be noticed." And kind of that existential isolation and despair, I think, is kind of at some level at the heart of the kid's story. He is, losing his religion. He's losing his kind of soul throughout this process, eventually leading to, if we take the typical interpretation, with it being consumed or killed at the end. And what's interesting is I think McCarthy viewed himself in a very similar way. When you look at his journals and kind of his personal ruminations in the archive, he's kind of like sometimes being very sad boy and not like what you think he would be like, and like kind of brooding. And Kierkegaard writes again that, "But one who does not work does not despair either. With despair, the negative bears a dialectical relation to something positive. The positive is only understood and sensed because of the negative." And this is kind of Kierkegaard's concept of the Abrahamic struggle, because we see Judge Holden, who's fallen into nihilism and feeling like he has this divine authority to commit violence. But the kid, even though he's engaging in some of the rape, maybe even some of the pedophilia or some of the other malignant aspects that the gang partakes in, he does retain a flicker of hope. He does kind of carry the fire forward, which sounds a little bit crazy, at some level. And I also feel Kierkegaard's influence in McCarthy's works in relation to having faith in the void, having faith in total darkness. And turning back to Kierkegaard again, quote, "The self is a relation that relates itself to itself in the relation. This relation is the synthesis, of the finite and the infinite, of the temporal and the eternal, of freedom and necessity." And I think this is really kind of shown through The Road, where even in Blood Meridian, where they're moving through a literal void, a barren wasteland. And in the road, there's a more positive thing they're holding on to, which is carrying the fire. But when you read some of the historical documents like My Confession, Judge Holden and Glanton were telling all the men that they were searching for El Dorado, literally, because the Mexica down in Mexico City told the Spanish that El Dorado is actually in northern Chihuahua, which is crazy. And so actually Glanton was out on that mission to find this magical city of gold, even all the way in the 19th century. So they were having some form of faith in the void. So really cool stuff here. I think that there's maybe some stuff I'm missing. Some of you Kierkegaardians out there, what did I miss? And thank you guys for being here. If you guys want to get some Cormac McCarthy merch, I have some Outer Dark merch. I have Blood Meridian merch, a bunch of other cool stuff. All the links to that and the Substack are all down in the description below, alongside a free document that details over 100 of Cormac McCarthy's favorite authors and favorite books, which is the most comprehensive resource online. And that's available for free. You can check out some of my writing and some other cool stuff all down there for free too. So thank you guys for the support. Thank you guys for the love. And we will be back tomorrow, most likely, with another Cormac McCarthy video.